April 14, 1912, 11:40 p.m. The RMS Titanic is traveling at approximately 22 knots, roughly 25 miles per hour, through the North Atlantic Ocean. The night is clear and bitterly cold. The sea is glassy calm. In the crow's nest, lookout Frederick Fleet spots something in the darkness ahead. He grabs the warning bell and strikes it 3 times. Iceberg, right ahead. The officer of the watch orders the helm hard to starboard. The engines are thrown into reverse. But at 22 knots, a ship the size of 4 city blocks does not stop quickly. The iceberg scrapes down the starboard side. 5 compartments flood. In 2 hours and 40 minutes, the greatest ship ever built will be at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. 1,517 people will die. And the question that has haunted every investigation since, every inquiry, every documentary, every book, is the same. Why was she going so fast? 1. The captain at the end of his career. Captain Edward John Smith was 62 years old when he took command of the Titanic. He was the most experienced, most celebrated captain in the White Star Line fleet, the millionaire's captain, as wealthy passengers called him, because so many of the elite specifically chose to travel on whichever ship Smith commanded. He had been at sea for nearly 4 decades. He had commanded more than 17 ships. He was the company's #1 choice for maiden voyages of its most prestigious vessels. He had previously commanded the maiden voyage of the Adriatic in 1907 and the Olympic in 1911. The Titanic was to be his last command. He was planning to retire after this voyage, his farewell trip, his victory lap after 40 years of service. He had once said, "I cannot imagine any condition which would cause a ship to founder. Modern shipbuilding has gone beyond that." That confidence, bred by decades of safe crossings, by the unbroken record of White Star's prestige fleet, by the culture of the era itself, is part of what killed 1,517 people. But it did not act alone. 2. The man in the expensive cabin. On board the Titanic, traveling in one of the finest first-class suites, was J. Bruce Ismay, chairman and managing director of the White Star Line. Ismay was the most powerful man in British commercial shipping. The White Star Line was his family's company, and the Titanic was his masterpiece. The largest, most luxurious ship ever built, designed to dominate the North Atlantic passenger trade. The competition was fierce. The Cunard Line operated the Mauretania and the Lusitania, ships that held the blue riband for the fastest Atlantic crossing. White Star's strategy had been to compete on luxury rather than speed. Their ships were larger, more opulent, more comfortable than Cunard's Greyhounds. But an early arrival in New York would generate enormous publicity. Newspapers would write about it, passengers would talk about it. A Wednesday arrival instead of Thursday, even by a few hours, would prove that the Titanic was not just beautiful, but swift. Ismay knew this, and throughout April 14th, multiple witnesses later testified that Ismay had been seen showing Captain Smith ice warnings received by wireless, and that these conversations were followed by the ship accelerating, not slowing. One survivor recalled Ismay enthusiastically discussing the ship's speed and the prospect of an early arrival. Another testimony suggested Ismay had specifically mentioned lighting additional boilers. At the American inquiry, Ismay denied it all. He testified that he had never interfered with the navigation of the ship, that the speed decisions were entirely the captain's, that he was merely a passenger. Senators on both sides of the Atlantic were skeptical. The Senate inquiry report stated plainly that warnings of danger seemed to stimulate the ship to action rather than to persuade her to fear. A passenger does not travel with the captain's itinerary in his pocket. Ismay was no ordinary passenger. 3. The warnings that were ignored. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic received at least 7 separate iceberg warnings from ships in the area. At 9 a.m., the Coronia warned of field ice ahead. At 11:40 a.m., the Nordam reported ice in the same region. At 1:42 p.m., the Baltic sent a warning of large quantities of field ice. Captain Smith received this message and handed it to Ismay, who reportedly put it in his pocket for several hours before returning it. At 5:50 p.m., Captain Smith altered the Titanic's course slightly south, a standard precaution, but he did not reduce speed. At 7:30 p.m., the Californian reported 3 large icebergs directly ahead. The message was brought to the bridge, but Smith was at a dinner party. It was left with the officer of the watch. At approximately 9:40 p.m., the Mesaba sent the most urgent warning of all, reporting a vast ice field directly on the Titanic's new course, containing heavy pack ice and a great number of large icebergs. Wireless operator Jack Phillips, overwhelmed with passenger messages, never delivered this one to the bridge at all. When Smith returned to the bridge at 9 p.m., he expressed satisfaction that the ship was making good speed through clear skies. He ordered that the watch be notified if conditions became hazy or foggy. Then he went to bed. At no point was the ship slowed. At no point were the lookouts given binoculars, which were inexplicably absent from the crow's nest on that voyage. At no point did the culture of the voyage shift from celebration to caution. 7 warnings, clear skies, 22 knots. Some decisions are made before the moment they're made. 4. Who was really to blame? The question of blame is more complex than any single villain can satisfy. Captain Smith was not reckless in any simple sense. The practice of maintaining speed through ice-warmed waters at night was common in that era. Other experienced captains did the same. The conventional wisdom was that in calm, clear conditions, a good watch could spot icebergs in time to avoid them. The Titanic was not unique in this approach. It was standard practice. What was unique was the combination of factors that night. No binoculars in the crow's nest, a sea so still and dark that the base of the iceberg, submerged and invisible, provided no warning ripple. A wireless operator who did not pass the most critical warning to the bridge, a captain at a dinner party when the final critical reports arrived. Ismay's role remains genuinely contested. There is no written order, there is no smoking gun, but the circumstantial evidence, the ice warnings in his pocket, the witnesses who observed his enthusiasm for speed, the pattern of acceleration rather than caution, led the American and British inquiries to raise questions that were never fully answered because neither inquiry had the political appetite to destroy the most powerful man in British shipping. The deeper truth is that the Titanic was a catastrophe of culture, not just of decisions. It was a culture that believed modern technology had conquered risk, that the sea had been domesticated, that unsinkable was not a metaphor, but a fact. Arrogance does not need an order. It just needs no one to ask the question. The price of the record. Captain Edward Smith died with his ship. He was last seen on the bridge as the Titanic went under, giving orders for passengers to be put into lifeboats. He did not take a lifeboat. His body was never recovered. J. Bruce Ismay did take a lifeboat, one of the last ones lowered. He survived. And for the rest of his life, the press on both sides of the Atlantic called him a coward. He retired from business within months of the disaster, lived quietly for another 25 years, and died in 1937, largely a broken man. The Titanic disaster transformed maritime law worldwide. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was enacted in 1914, requiring sufficient lifeboats for all passengers, mandatory lifeboat drills, and 24-hour wireless watch. Ice patrol in the North Atlantic was established. But here is the lesson that has outlasted all the regulations. The Titanic was not sunk by an iceberg. It was sunk by a system of pressure, commercial pressure to arrive early, cultural pressure to demonstrate invulnerability, professional pressure on a captain at the end of a celebrated career not to be the man who slowed down the greatest ship in the world. No single person gave the order to go too fast. But every person in the system created the conditions in which too fast felt like just right. 7 iceberg warnings, 22 knots, 1,517 dead. The record was never set, but the cost was paid in full.